Hi everyone, my name is Christina Dorset, and I'm one of the Research and Instruction Librarians at Wolfgram Memorial Library on Widener University's Chester campus. The following event was recorded live. It is an advocacy training done by Ashli Giles-Perkins of the Education Law Center, and she is a specialist in advocacy. Unfortunately, the beginning of her presentation was cut off. So this will begin with part of her introduction. I apologize for not having the beginning, but I assure you this training is definitely worth it. So I hope you enjoy. Thanks.
Okay. Yes. Okay. And I attended Loyola for a dual degree. I also did a dual degree in undergrad. Maybe would not recommend that for grad school. So I studied criminal justice and psychology with an English minor in undergrad, and then went to law school, and I also was in the master's program at Loyola in Chicago, and I have a master's in cultural educational policy studies. I graduated peak pandemic in 2020, and I moved to Philadelphia peak pandemic, peak uprisings, summer uprisings, summer 2020. So little context of how I was introduced to the state of Pennsylvania. A lot of my background focuses on equity in school funding, is where I started my organizing, youth civic engagement and accountability, and that's accountability of elected officials as called out by young people. I do reparations workshops. I mitigate school to prison pipeline through my professional and community work, developing or helping to develop culturally responsive curriculum. And the tools I do that through are coalition building, grassroots centered lobbying and campaign work. And now through Know Your Rights workshops and educational access for system involved students. Just really briefly about my fellowship that's actually concluding at the end of next week. I have been at Education Law Center as a 2-year fellowship until October 2020 to October 2022. I've focused primarily on young people who are in system settings, residential facilities, that includes juvenile detention centers, that includes adult prisons, that includes hospitals, that includes residential treatment facilities, temporary stay, students experiencing homelessness, everything in between. I do work with direct families and young people. I do partners and trainings such as these, and advocating overall to make sure that youth who are system involved have access to quality education. I always show this graphic. We can't get into it today. I just use it as a center point for why I do this work. And the statistic in the middle, just 9% of those between 16 and 21 years old who were in a residential justice facility were able to earn a GED or high school diploma from the cohort. And so the question that really guided my fellowship is, where's the other 91% of those young people that were not able to get GEDs or high school diplomas? What happens to that 91% of our society? And so that's not what we'll talk about today, but if you're interested in that, of course, please contact me. So just some key topics, there are many. We'll start next with some tone setting and expectations for the space. I'd like to also do a check-in. I know there's a class here, so that might be somewhat difficult, but would love to still hear from as many people as possible to know who's in the room and what you're interested in. We'll go through the learning objectives, and then we'll do some foundation laying. We'll actually spend quite a bit of time on historical troubling patterns in our history and our society. And so for those of you that are like, critical race theory, maybe we'll see, we'll learn about that officially, not maybe what is on the news sometimes. We'll then do state and federal laws, protective and preventative rights and how to exercise them. And then I'd like to do toolkit exploration. So there are so many groups that have been organizing and putting together resources and talking points and toolkits and fact sheets and maps of policies and tracking policies. There's so many national and local groups doing this work. And so we want to spend time actually looking and going through those resources. If you were going to try to use one of the toolkits, what does it do? What are you learning from it? What's missing from it? Who can you share it with? And so we really want to do some hands-on toolkit interactions. And then hopefully time for questions at the end. So just tone setting, these are, you could call them community agreements, but as the organizer in me, I won't call them that because we as a community did not agree to them. I have said them. And so in this space, we respect each other's humanity, experiences, and voice. So there's room for us to dream in this space, to claim aspirations, and to reimagine what could be better. There's also room for honesty and wisdom, data and reflection about our state and nation's troubling history. We will assume good intentions, and when we did ask for clarity, and this is sometimes calling others in. Calling someone out is typically perceived as negative, but calling in is typically done more in a careful manner, in a thoughtful manner, in a teaching sort of manner, and not in a chastising, you were wrong sort of manner. I won't do this as much. I do definitely say we a lot, and that's because I'm sharing space with you all, but commit to using I statements as much as possible, as opposed to blanket or generalizations. We, see, I did it, understand the issues are far more than we could really cover today. And also hopefully that this is not our last conversation. This won't be the last time you attend something like this. This won't be the last time I do something like this. This may not be the last time that we're in each other's presence. And so while there will feel like there's so much more to say, and 2 hours is obviously long enough, want also to be flexible and open-minded, and as much as possible use Zoom. You know, happy for those to write in the chat or, you know, react with emojis, raise your hand, all of those fun features. And let's go ahead and practice that and get started. So if you're able, if you could please share your name, right? It's on the screen, pronouns that may or may not be on the screen, and location or affiliation. So if you are, say, I'm joining from Connecticut today, probably not, but maybe, or you're in a university, or you're joining from, I don't know, Philadelphia or Coatesville or Lancaster. And then a topic that's most concerning to you. So it can be short, could be, you know, text, book bans, curriculum, you know, protecting students, protecting teachers, something in between, or something totally different. So if possible, name, pronouns, where you are or kind of affiliated, how you got here, and then a topic that's most concerning to you. I'm gonna go ahead and open chat. I think everyone should have access, and at the same time, leaving this up just for a few more seconds, and then we'll go ahead and jump in. So things we hope to cover today, although I think many of us know. Key civil rights issues facing students of color and LGBTQ students and students in between. Participants will be introduced to dangers of censorship, book bans, attacks on curriculum, attacks on progression towards equity and on free speech. We'll learn about the rights of students to be free from racism and homophobia and transphobia. We're actually not going to cover xenophobia today. Participants will learn about educational rights of students and parents in varying school settings and the different state and federal laws that apply. That includes policy. Attendees are going to also learn about existing landscape and climate. So we'll go backwards and then we'll jump to where we are now. And we'll also do strategies that can be employed to address future challenges, including tools for messaging, for listening, for engaging opposition, and for organizing. Okay, I'm looking in the chat. Thank you for jumping in. Just want to see where people are at. Okay. All right, let's keep it going by setting the foundation. Our education system is built on a foundation of inequity, and we will cover that. maybe in more depth than people might want. Pennsylvania in particular are some of the most racially segregated schools in the country, and the largest wealth gap between districts in the United States. The system was designed to be and persist in being strongly anti-Black and anti-poor, both through policy and practice. And I think we've seen very much so lately. This is actually a slide I've been using since my very first presentation. It's an education law center staple. And I think we've seen other persisting antis that maybe we can add here. COVID-19 really exacerbated a lot of these barriers and unleashed new barriers, where in some we thought we were making so much progress and everything's different. I think a couple years ago, people said racism is over. Remember those days? Barack Obama is president. We are not there. And just some kind of ode to ELC's funding trial that some may have been following to secure equitable state funding for schools across the Commonwealth. Districts with the most economic security and resources typically serving white children, and through COVID made the transitioning of new learning easier. Districts, for example, that already had MacBooks or Chromebooks for all of their students, and then districts, for example, Philadelphia, that were not able to secure technology or even internet for students until the following school year. And I would say for some of my clients, it never happened. And so when we say we want to get back to normal, understanding that the normal that we were was the system of inequity, and we don't want to further perpetuate educational deprivations, we want to do better. And so this hopefully will cover how we got to where we are, and hopefully where we can still do much better. I'm also taking another quick look in the chat. So thank you everyone who is able to chime in. If you just joined, name, pronouns, where you are or who you're affiliated with, and topic you're most concerned about today. All right, go time. How did we get here? It would be, and I'll just say impossible, even if we met for 8 hours or a full week, to really review everything. And so we are going to cover what we can, and wanted to kind of set some context. So going way, way back, after the abolition of slavery in the United States, 3 constitutional amendments were passed for newly freed African Americans, freed legal status. This is obviously 13th Amendment that abolished slavery. I should put an asterisk there. 14th Amendment providing citizenship, and 15th Amendment guaranteeing the right to vote. That also requires an asterisk. If you were a Black woman at that time, you were not voting. In spite of these amendments and Civil Rights Act, to enforce these amendments, the Supreme Court then handed down a series of decisions that virtually nullified all the work of Congress during the Reconstruction. Particularly Black people separated from whites by law and by private action. This is in transportation, public accommodations, through recreation facilities, separated even in prison, separated in the armed forces, and of course in schools. And this is across the North and the South. 1896 in particular, the Supreme Court sanctioned legal separation of races by ruling in Plessy versus Ferguson, and held that separate but equal facilities don't violate the 14th Amendment to citizenship and equal protection. And so for those not familiar, Plessy versus Ferguson is a case where an African-American man was boarding a train. There was a colored section that he did not want to sit in. He said, well, we have all these new laws. Why would I still need to be separated on the basis of race when we have an equal protection clause? And the Supreme Court rejected his argument. He said it's just merely a legal distinction between white people and Black people. It's not unconstitutional. And as a result, we saw restrictive Jim Crow legislation and policy become commonplace. And also further context, so we're in 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson was not overturned until the 1950s, almost 60 years later. And so not only was the damage not just done, it was solidified for most of American history. And these vestiges of slavery and segregation live on with us even in present day. So I'll move a little bit quicker through the next slides, historical slides, so we can get to the meat, but covering now Jim Crow. Jim Crow laws, a collection of state and local statutes that legalized racial segregation. Jim Crow, and just some kind of fun fact, not fun, right, but history. There was a Black minstrel show character, it's kind of like a puppet. And so the laws, which existed for about 100 years, post-Civil War era until about 1968, were meant to marginalize African Americans by denying right to vote, hold jobs, get an education, or other opportunities. And if you defy Jim Crow, you may be jailed, fined, arrested, beat, and sometimes killed. And the way Jim Crow showed up was in separate schools, through Black families and the types of jobs that they were able to get, children being required to work, obviously not at school. And actually some schools were only open 2, if maybe 3 months for the entire year, in rural Black communities. Overcrowded schools for those that were able to be in school. We saw multi-grade classrooms with just one teacher, leaky roofs, sagging floors, windows without glass, limited access to books or to teachers. Books also were different for Black schools and for white schools. They taught different things. For example, the Declaration of Independence was removed from the textbooks sent to Black schools. We can think of maybe why that would be, because obviously it wasn't applicable, and not to incite people to think that they had rights, right? Students without desks. Is any of this sounding familiar? Some of these things are still true for Black schools and predominantly Black neighborhoods. And I would say rural schools as well. One other key legal decision, just because that is my practice, McLaurin versus Oklahoma State. So this is where bringing in just higher education. I know a lot of us are situated in higher education, but a lot of the debates and discourse that have been ongoing are primarily focused on K-12. And so George McLaurin is a veteran school teacher. He applied to an all-white university, University of Oklahoma, to seek a doctoral degree in 1948. His application was rejected simply because there was a state law that made it illegal for Blacks and whites to attend the same school. McLaurin filed a complaint against the university on a state court level, and he won. He was allowed to attend classes, but not with his fellow students. So in the picture, you can see that he's in the hallway and everyone else is in the classroom, but he's attending class, right? He's in the same class. He's getting the same material and experience, right? There's nothing wrong with that. He filed with the United States Supreme Court and also won. It was 9-0. They ruled racial segregation within facilities and institutions is inconsistent with Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The Oklahoma statute that was in place, a student filed injunctive relief, meaning something needs to happen now. Not seeking damages, I'm seeking this policy that's happening to be gone, to be done away with. And this case is just significant because it is 1948, the Supreme Court is now beginning to recognize racial segregation is not consistent with what the Constitution says. And this case paved the way for Brown versus Board of Education, series of cases that some would say changed the landscape, others would say it did intend to do that, but did not actually do that. And just kind of wrapping up, since I've alluded to Brown, was significant. Plessy versus Ferguson that we just spoke about was finally overturned. The separate but equal doctrine is not equal, and it was unconstitutional. And just bringing it back to Pennsylvania schools, as I said, are still most racially segregated in the nation. And I capitalize most because it is the most segregated in the nation. And whiter schools receive more funding. Some of the largest gaps, not just in terms of race, but in terms of funding between the very wealthiest district and the very poorest district. Sometimes the average revenue gap between poor and rich districts is continuing to grow and is almost $5,000 per student. And overall, as a state, Pennsylvania underfunds education by about $4.6 billion a year. And so when we think about Pennsylvania underfunding education, and we're seeing that some schools are the most wealthiest in the nation, you have to ask yourself, how are funds being distributed and how are children being educated? And where's our focus when we're having these discussions about banning books? We'll get to it later, but spoiler alert, parents are concerned about school funding and children being safe. But the political discourse at this time is not students being safe or schools being funded. So now I want to spend some time, surprise, surprise, on actual critical race theory. And so I say actual because there's a lot of chat that is not what I would say is critical race theory. And really, I did my master's work and coursework rooted in critical race theory. And when I first heard about a CRT ban, I was like, no way. If anyone knew what critical race theory was, there's no way they'd be against it. And as time went on, I realized, no, actually, that's why they're against it. And on some instances, it's a total misunderstanding, just a blanket phrase to, I don't know, diversity, or a blanket term to equity. And so what critical race theory actually is, it's a series of graduate level legal frameworks referenced as early as the 1970s, examines the law's role, which is why we just did what we just did, in facilitating, producing, and insulating racial inequality in American institutions, such as colleges, and laws like Oklahoma that say legally Black students and white students can't be in the same classroom. That's a perfect example of a policy that critical race theory would study and analyze what kind of impact it has on society. And so critical race theory looks at how systems function to maintain dominance of white people in society. It also recognizes that race intersects with many other identities, including sexuality, gender identity, and others, intersectionality, right? It operates under some key themes. So racism is normal and systemic. And the systemic here, having just demonstrated at least a few policies and instances such as Plessy versus Ferguson and the vestiges in the Jim Crow and all that followed. The United States founded on the theft of land and labor. Race is culturally invented and fluid, it's not biological. Federal law preserves unequal treatment of people on the basis of race. And so we'll unpack these. This is just kind of an overview, somewhat broken down. Some of it needs more explanation, but we're not here to do a deep dive into critical race theory. But we do want to cover what CRT is not. It's not a synonym for culturally relevant teaching. This is something that emerged in the 1990s. That teaching approach is to affirm students' ethnic and racial backgrounds in an intellectually rigorous manner. So one person that I studied extensively when doing my master's thesis, Gloria Lasser-Billings, proposed three main components, also hearing culturally relevant teaching, culturally relevant pedagogy, culturally responsive teaching. Sometimes those are synonyms, not necessarily, but pedagogy focusing on student learning and academic success, so the rigor, developing cultural competence to assist students in developing positive ethnic and social identities within themselves. So that is what makes this somewhat unique. And then taking that a step further, right? Supporting students' critical consciousness or their ability to recognize and critique societal inequalities. So kind of breaking that down is The emphasis is always the learning, but at the same time, students' own cultural identities are being developed. And based on that analysis and based on the analysis of societal inequalities, you have your framework. Moving on, critical race theory is not racism. Feels like that has to be said. Critical race theory is not typically found in K-12 curriculum. But I have two examples that I want to walk through, and so hopefully the video and sound will work out smoothly. If not, I have a backup plan. So let's just move into a video, but it is an example of, also there's some millennial Gen Z acronyms at you all. So CRT, IRL, critical race theory in real life. So if you learned a new acronym and you take something away and you say IRL, meet me IRL, and you say meet me in real life and not on Zoom, you're welcome. So some districts have issued mission statements, resolutions, have spoken about policies using some discourse of critical race theory. It's not fully clear to what degree educators are actually explicitly teaching the concepts or even using the curriculum materials or other methods that would actually draw out critical race theory. For one thing, scholars say a lot of the CRT realm is written in academic language. It's published on academic journals. It's not necessarily accessible to K-12 teachers if their local elementary school, doesn't subscribe to prestigious academic journals. Obviously, information is not everywhere, right? And people can find things all over the internet. But just sharing that it's not typically what is happening. It's a term that's being sort of, taken out of context. So want to take a quick pause. I know we have a variety of folks in the room. Thanks for everyone who was able to check in into the chat. I'd like to, if you could either raise your physical hand or your Zoom hand. Has anyone ever heard of the book called The Space Traders? And small hint is written by Derek Bell, who is a civil rights lawyer and scholar, and want to see if people have heard of this. I don't see any enthusiastic yes. I'm seeing lots of no. Okay, so I wanted to spend time in this video. So I'll give it some context because we obviously can't watch it. It's a short film. It's also a book. But for educators and for those who are looking for exposure to younger students, this would be a great example of that. And so just some background. There are aliens from outer space, right? Fun, we love science fiction. They offer to solve all of the United States woes, right? The climate crisis, they're gonna eliminate the national debt, they're gonna provide, energy, clean energy, we're gonna get rid of dependence on fossil fuels, right? They paint this dream, and in return, they demand just one thing, just one small little thing, which is all of the Black people that live in the United States. If you give us all the Black people that live in the United States, we will solve your climate problems. We'll solve your national debt crisis. We will have clean energy. We will change the world for you if you do this one very small thing. And so, no nail biter, right? Politicians say, well, why don't we take a vote? Let's vote. Let's be democratic about this. Let's have the people decide what we do. And so I won't spoil it. Maybe it's obvious. Let's see if it will play. I want to start it actually just 3 minutes and not 23 or however long. So let me know if you all can't hear. Hopefully there's no ad. Great, no ad today. And I'm gonna do it a little bit before sound. Great.
You are standing on the...
I'm the vice president of...
bearing exquisite gifts that will restore your nation to its former glory. Nearly limitless quantities of gold and precious metals that will instantly erase your deficit. Machines that will renew your rivers and your air. Cold fusion technology for a safe, cheap, and inexhaustible source of energy. All we ask in return is the delivery to our vessels. 5 days from now, every child, woman, and man in your nation with at least 2,500 milligrams of melanin in their skin per square centimeter.
What the hell is melanin?
Put more simply, in trade for solving all your most pressing domestic catastrophes, we are asking for every person in your country that you would classify as black.
Are you kidding?
No, we are not.
What are you going to do with them?
Well, that does not concern you. We give you 5 days to decide, and the offer is non-negotiable. We will not try to coerce you in any way. Yet, I hope we can do some business together.
We wait all this time for a fucking UFO and they come here with this? It's all bullshit, right? Right.
Maybe. Maybe this day's going to go down in history. An end to poverty, end to pollution, cheap, unlimited energy for every American. Sounds like a hell of a re-election platform.
Sam, I have to go on record as saying this is crazy. But
what?
well, welfare rolls would be cut 40%. Food stamps, Medicare, drug abuse programs slashed.
May I add something, Mr. President? You know, if I could guarantee the prosperity of this great country by giving life or taking off of those space traders, I'd do so without a moment's hesitation.
You know, the Secretary's courage is not unlike that American men and women have exhibited when called to military service. Well, some go more willingly than others, but almost all go with the knowledge that they might never come back.
I don't believe what I'm hearing. Doesn't anybody see a downside to this?
You know, Casper's absolutely right. The guilt that many whites would feel for sending the blacks away could take a severe psychological toll, with medical costs possibly reaching astronomical levels.
This is madness. Our military services would be decimated, depleted of 30% of our manpower.
But with unlimited energy, think of the weapons you could create.
Sure, we want to hear more. It's on YouTube. It's accessible. It's also a book. And there's a lot that we could say from this. What I want to say from this is this is a precursor, a good discussion starter. It's a kind of a like, well, that's impossible. That's insane. That would never happen. It seems so far-fetched. But the way that the educator who wrote the piece, I can share some point, drop a bunch of things in the chat and share at the end. This is pointing out in ways throughout history, a white majority country has treated the rights of Black people to gain a variety of social, economical benefits. And so the class moves to discussing examples. And so students were able to call out examples. For example, slavery. For example, redlining. For example, Jim Crow. For example, mortgages that were contracts, right? Segregated schools. We could go on and on and on with examples in our history. And so that's just kind of a mind opener of, that seems really far-fetched and crazy, yet we can think of examples in history where something like this has happened. And so what does that mean for us as people who live here? So again, not a critical race theory lesson, but just an overview. So moving on. I have one other video since that one actually played and we had sound. And now I'll ask another question. if people are familiar with the author and scholar Richard Rothstein, who authored The Color of Law, How the Government Segregated America. Okay, Dana, let's see, others, Zoom hands, yeses in the chat. Okay, Teresa, okay. All right, so I'm going to do just another quick clip from this video, but this is a separate example, kind of moving us from science fiction to reality, actual instances. So let's test, and I'll start it at 2 minutes. Or so good.
In the middle of the 20th century, the city of St. Louis, Missouri, and the United States federal government created neighborhoods in order to create segregated public housing. In the late 1930s, another New Deal program, the United States Housing Authority, was adopted. The very first projects built under the United States Housing Authority authorization were in Austin, Texas, because the most aggressive proponent of public housing at that time was the congressman from Austin, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And Johnson got the United States Housing Authority to put its first projects in Austin, separate projects for whites, for African Americans, and the project for Hispanics. The project for African Americans was placed in a location that the city plan of Austin had designated as a ghetto for African Americans. The United States Housing Authority and the local Austin Housing Authority demolished something called Emancipation Park, which was a celebrations location for the abolition of slavery. The design was to move all African Americans in the city of Austin into this community, whether in public housing or in private housing. The city of Austin then began to close schools for African Americans elsewhere in the city and close libraries and other public facilities to force African Americans to move to the east side. Another program that the federal government pursued to enforce segregation was the work of the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, which subsidized the development of suburbs like Levittown, New York, on condition that they only be sold to white families and that the homes in those suburbs had deeds that prohibited resale to African Americans. The Federal Housing Administration's underwriting manual said that inharmonious racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities, meaning that loans to African Americans could not be insured. Government at all levels throughout the nation were involved in promoting and enforcing the restrictive deeds in homes and places like Levittown, and judges enforced the view that these deeds did not violate the Constitution because they were private agreements. Although white middle-class families that moved into suburbs like Levittown could buy property with no down payments if they were veterans and low-interest mortgages, middle-class African Americans had to make substantial down payments and get uninsured mortgages with higher interest rates. In many, if not most cases, African Americans could not get mortgages at all because the federal government would not insure them. As a result, they bought their homes on contract, like an installment plan where they accumulated no equity and could be evicted from their homes in the event of a single missed payment. Thus, contract buyers did not have the option of leaving a declining neighborhood before their properties were paid for in full. If they did, they would lose everything they'd invested in that property to date. The term redlining comes from the federal government's creation of maps of urban areas nationwide. And those maps were color-coded to indicate where it was safe to insure mortgages. Anywhere African Americans lived, even places where African Americans lived nearby, were colored red to indicate to appraisers that these neighborhoods were too risky for the FHA to insure. The FHA's justification was that if African Americans bought homes in white neighborhoods, or even if they bought homes near those neighborhoods, the property values of the homes they were insuring, the white homes they were insuring, would decline, and therefore their loans would be at risk. In 1940, for example, a Detroit builder was denied FHA insurance for a project that was near an African American neighborhood. He then constructed a half-mile concrete wall, 6 feet high and a foot thick, separating the two neighborhoods, and then the FHA approved the loan. In the 3 decades during which it administered this policy, however, the agency never provided or obtained evidence to support its claim that integration undermined property values. In fact, Often racial integration caused property values to increase because African Americans' housing supply was so restricted and they had so many fewer choices. If African Americans had access to housing throughout metropolitan areas, supply and demand balances would have kept their rents and home prices at reasonable levels. Without access, landlords and sellers were free to take advantage of the greater demand relative to supply for African American housing. A 1946 National Magazine article described a Chicago building where the landlord had divided a 540 square foot storefront into 6 cubicles, each housing a family. He had similarly subdivided the second story. Total monthly rent was as great as that generated by a luxury apartment on Chicago's Gold Coast along Lake Michigan. Such exploitation was possible only because public policy denied African Americans opportunities to participate in the city's white housing market.
All right, Richard, thank you. I am big proponents of videos and relying on others who have already said things versus me giving you 5, maybe at least 5 slides of all the things that he said, right? And just want to pull out a couple themes that I heard. Of course, I watched this before, but build a wall is like sitting with me of like that happening, and we maybe, I don't know, moved away from that. And a couple slides ago covered separate but equal and how that was not possible and how we saw it still enacted, separate neighborhoods. And just thinking about separate neighborhoods, meaning separate demographics, separate schools, separate tax, separate, right, grocery stores or not grocery stores, and all of the things that our neighborhoods tell us. And I know, even thinking about how those things happen. The example I skipped in the beginning was St. Louis, a Black neighborhood that had a highway, run through it, everyone evicted, the art built through Black neighborhoods. And so that displacement lives on. Those people had to go somewhere. The schools that were closed, the children need to be educated somewhere. And that's where we see overcrowding and underfunding and all of the things, and they're snowballing on top of each other. So that's just context of not just racism, right? But federally sanctioned legal methods, policies, rules, and requirements that the government put into place. And so that's a unique piece, I think, of critical race theory that is likely not actually happening. When people say critical race theory, if you're missing the role of government or of law or of policy or of practice, it's the critical piece, right? You can talk about race and racism and all those different things all day long, but just highlighting the distinction. Okay. So moving forward, also reminding everyone to use the chat. So if you're having reactions or thoughts, if you're like, wow, I need to unpack that, or I want to watch that later, the video is segregated by design, but the book is The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, and maybe people have read it. So recentering, what the attacks really mean, what's really happening here. Many have said that, racial reform is depicted as 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? Which is like, at some point you'll make progress. Historically, however, it's like more like 1 step forward, 7 steps back. As 1 decade of progress, for example, during the Reconstruction, right, all of the work of Congress undone, right, by Plessy versus Ferguson, undone by Jim Crow laws that lasted much, much, much longer than Congress spent in the Reconstruction era of about 9 years, 8 years, 11. A violent reinstitutionalization of white supremacy and racial tyranny that amounted to utter and complete exclusion. That's what happened. During the Civil Rights Movement, there was a decade and a half of active civil rights reforms, and this was immediately met by massive resistance. You can think back to Brown versus Board. And then 3 and 4 decades following Brown versus Board, you could even say to present day, to undo that, right? Reactionary responses to reforms. And so I pulled a tweet. I cropped it a little too much, but it was the like Texas, education. I don't know. It's a nonprofit. It's not like a state board, but they tweeted, "Are you wondering if critical race theory is being taught in your child's school? Stay on the lookout for some buzzworthy names and language. Hashtag ban CRT." And so I want to read. I know this is blurry, and I know you can't see it. So critical race theory, right, should be banned. Equity, diversity, and inclusion are banned. Buzzwords. Cultural competence, implicit or unconscious bias, social justice, restorative justice, systemic oppression, microaggressions, woo, scary, allies and allyship should be banned. Black Lives Matter, liberation, white privilege, colonialism, and wait for it, the word identity. I don't know. That's such a common word. So yes, this tweet, I believe, was later pulled down. But as we know, it's out there. Someone screenshotted it. Someone wrote an article. Someone else wrote an article. Someone else retweeted it. It's in the universe. You can't take it back. And I want to pause briefly and switch gears. So we've spent some time on race, talking now about attacks on LGBTQ communities. And I'll say where I'm starting in my slides is not where it starts by any means, but where we see states enacting laws and policies, and where we see the issue coming into the public education realm. So 1980s and 1990s, having trouble speaking today, as a response to the growing HIV and AIDS epidemic, states decided that the best way to address that would be to prohibit instruction of LGBTQ plus issues in public education. What HIV and AIDS epidemic has to do with public education? Unclear. North Carolina legislature repealed their state's prohibition of discussing homosexuality in the classroom. So this was a prior law that they had on the books for many decades. And in 2006, they said, you know what? I think we can do better. In 2016, following a lawsuit from Equality Utah, the Republican-controlled Utah state legislature repealed its, quote, no promo homo law with support from Republican Governor Gary Herbert. So unpacking that a little bit more, there essentially was restrictions on the teachings, entitled them, horrible, I think, title, but no promo homo, mean we're not promoting homosexuality, right? Of course, it wouldn't be the other way around of like, we're gonna make sure that homophobia isn't promoted, but that's not what that means here. In 2016, again, not that long ago, by any means, moving 2019, Republican-controlled Arizona state legislature repealed their law with support from Republican Governor Doug Ducey, and South Carolina, North Carolina. So South Carolina's no promo homo law was overturned by a U.S. District Court of South Carolina after failing to, quote, satisfy any level of judicial review under the Equal Protection Clause. And so briefly, law, constitutional law 101 is levels of scrutiny. And depending on the protected class that's at play, some things are higher up and require a higher level of scrutiny. They require a higher bar, meaning, yes, this is harmful, but what are we weighing it against? And so if you can come up with, depending on the tier, it either needs to be reasonable, it might need to be rational, it might need to be necessary, it might need to be reasonably calculated to achieve means, any of those kind of phrases, and they're not all in the same bracket. But if you can't meet any of them, it can't be a law. And so they weren't able to meet any level of the judicial review under the Equal Protection Clause. And that's why it was overturned. It wasn't like a moral champion Republican governor being like, this is wrong. It's that it can't hold up in court. We can't have the Constitution that we have and have this law. And so that's why just 3 years ago, that law came off the books. In 2021, the other 4 states that still have that law, Texas, looking at you, solely prohibit instruction on LGBTQ plus issues in sex education. Texas is the only state that prohibits instruction on LGBTQ issues in both general education and in sexual education. And so this is active. This is the current law in Texas. There is no instruction on LGBTQ issues in general education and in sexual education programs to date. Yes, there are teachers and schools and districts that have said, we don't do that here. Here, we teach everyone, right, equally, and we are going to be honest. And sometimes those districts are fined or face consequences. And sometimes their students stand up and say, we need this. And so that's an ongoing battle in Texas. I'll just throw out a fun fact that many of us maybe already know, but a lot of the textbooks and curriculum come out of where? Texas. Right. Okay, we're not going to go into that today, but flagging that as being relevant. So it almost is like, why do I have to make this slide? But if nothing else, use these as talking points, right? LGBTQ policies are harmful, according to Lambda Legal, which is awesome. We'll pick 3 reasons, because there could be an entire day spent on why they're harmful. But first, they're stigmatizing and they discriminate against LGBTQ plus students. They treat them differently than other students in the classroom. For example, heterosexual students are not taught that they are, quote, not acceptable to the general public. Yes, that is a quote from a book, because of their sexual orientation. Anti-LGBTQ curriculum laws perpetuate a stereotype of LGBTQ people as dangerous or immoral, or folks who other students need to be protected from. When you're calling it out in that way, when you're ostracizing students in that way as to what's acceptable, who is acceptable, and who is not, that is stigma, that is discrimination. We'll get to it later. That is illegal. And that's just one example of why and how it's harmful. Second, laws frustrate sexual health education, both because it blocks accurate information and also because it promotes inaccurate stereotypes, which overall undermines student health. And I would add in student mental health, wellness. For example, Arizona, another state of the 4, expressly forbids instruction suggesting that some methods of sex are safe methods of homosexual sex, which in one instance is like, what are you trying to say here? And in other instances is, why call this out in this way? And so again, it's frustrating to actual education as a whole. To sex health educators, curriculum is confusing. And further, research shows that stigma, which the laws reinforce, are also associated with lower self-esteem and greater risk-taking behavior, all in all harm to students as a whole, but particularly to students who identify as LGBTQ. And further, and third, these laws have a chilling effect on inclusive curriculum for LGBTQ programs and policies, even when they would not actually be barred, meaning teachers or advocates are like, well, can I do this? What happens if I teach this? Will I lose my job? It's not clear. And so, in other words, where, for example, there's nothing that says you can't teach about gay civil rights leader Harvey Milk in a history class, or that in an English class you can't read a poem from Walt Whitman, teachers and schools may misinterpret the laws as doing that, even if it doesn't explicitly say that. By having a policy that's limiting what you can and can't teach, you start to have to make those judgment calls about, well, maybe I should just not include this. And so all that does is harm LGBTQ students, one, but two, all students are being deprived of an accurate, inclusive education. Everyone in the class is impacted when the curriculum is limited or is biased or is ignoring groups and classes and identities of people. That is something that impacts everyone that's in the class. So want to pause. I was like, are we at our 1 hour mark? We're right on time. I was like, that's good. It's 11 o'clock on the dot. Okay, so now how did we get here again, right? Because I spent this time talking about history and vestiges of slavery and Plessy versus Ferguson, and that got overturned, but did it really, and how the government, blah, blah, blah. So now we are in another space where this is happening. I was like, my animations didn't work. They're all up at once. That's okay. We'll also break these down one by one in the slides to come. So first, and not first, right? Because first we already covered that. But again, second first, after progression comes regression, right? We were kind of making progress, right? There were people, like I shared, racism is over. We're in a, post-racial society, and we've eradicated differences and all those things. There were some solid years of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. It was, I won't say started, probably didn't start there, but really took hold in corporate America and nonprofits, and eventually into schools. And we'll go into that. Following that, we have global social justice, emphasis on global, reckoning following very viral, very vicious murder of George Floyd in summer 2020, and what some would call a second coming of the civil rights movement. Also worth clarifying there is, it was not just George Floyd, right? There were a slew of very public of murders of Black people, particularly by police, that happened in summer 2020. And folks came out on a global scale in the millions. It spread like wildfire everywhere. Countries were looking at America, some in a new light of like, what? No way. And America, for some, was the first time that they're looking at it like, what? This has been happening? Where have I been? It was a time of reckoning for many. September 2020, right? Gotta nip it in the butt, right? Trump calls out critical race theory and issues an executive ban against racial equity trainings on a federal level. So I will also have the executive order. So that happened. It was kind of some would say is a starting point for where we are now. On day one of President Biden's term, he reversed this ban on the federally funded diversity trainings. So this was rolled back, but it wasn't done. Trump-inspired rhetoric pops up across the nation at state and local levels, at school boards, to continue this work to ban racial equity. The ban originally directed all federal agencies to conduct equity assessments, to reallocate resources, to advance equity for all, including people of color and others who have been historically underserved and marginalized. There was also some discrimination that Trump moved forward that Biden rolled back. The other bill that was rolled back, and then new progressive policies put into place. So extending a federal non-discrimination protection to members of LGBTQ community, and continuing to build off the landmark Supreme Court decision of Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia. Now moving to the bottom, public discussions in the media rev up. The target on critical race theory grows wider. Predominantly white parents begin to form anti-critical race theory groups. Schools start to roll back their DEI programming, ban books about Rosa Parks, put restrictions on words and on curriculum. Meanwhile, the spotlight shifts again, and what LGBTQ advocates would call now a third wave of anti-LGBTQ policies begin to surface now, or resurface, as advocates would say, at a state level. Gender studies, health ed, sex ed, pride flags, trans and non-binary students, school sports, pronouns, bathrooms are all thrust into national debate. And so this is where we're situated now. This is now. And so I want to go back, starting at the beginning of this timeline, really not a timeline, but just plucking points in history. And then we'll spend some time unpacking those. So backing up just slightly, evolution of diversity in the workplace is really not new. It's rooted somewhat in the 1960s, and it's a result of a lot of anti-discrimination legislation, such as Equal Pay Act of 1963. Some of us are still waiting for equal pay. Title VII of Civil Rights Act, Age Discrimination and Employment Act of 1967, affirmative action, and so on. 1970s into the 1990s, you have now diversity hiring. We're casting a wider net, right? We're attracting broader talent. We're seeing shifts, typically at a corporate America level. And what that found is that that's working. Like this is having an impact. Consumer brands recognize now valued diverse workforce that reflects a diverse customer base yields higher profits and better quality products, right? More people weighing in. Companies are not just focused on recruiting, but retaining talent. There starts to be studies and investigations into whether your employer is a fit for you, right? And not the other way around. There starts to be a shift. Emotional intelligence, inclusive culture, DEI efforts, these things are on the rise. These things are what's in, right? It's in now to be diverse is essentially the trajectory here. And so that started to take hold, right? Even going a bit further, inclusion is the focus. Diversity among the base, and not just the base, right? But in the boardroom and in leadership and in CEOs, calling out, I think we've seen a lot lately of like, first Black CEO ever of this company, first Black woman CEO, first Latino CEO ever of this company. We're seeing those things now happening, and that's indicating that it wasn't like that, but there's some movement. My people, right? No one says Gen Y. That's why I put it here. We're always called millennials. We enter the workforce and we have very different thoughts about what workplaces should be and what they should look like. And something called self-care comes into the workplace. Studies continue on implicit bias and impact on inclusion. And so what does this have to do with schools? Let's go back. We're jumping back now into time. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Right? We've maybe heard this before. But in practice, the meaningful inclusion of individuals who are different from majority has been fraught. Learning about evolution of the education system and its treatment of students who are different in terms of race, gender, ability, sexuality, these are the places where we can say, are we able to live up to this expectation? Have we been doing that? And so it requires us to look at how we've treated, I covered it a little bit, Black students, right? Segregation, separate schools, but now we want to kind of step back even further. Children with disabilities. In America's earliest days, children born with disabilities were so-called source of shame, right? Guilt, stashed away in institutions. Even into the late 20th century, almost 2 million students a year with disabilities were excluded entirely from public education. And that's a practice that people believed. They said that children were uneducatable, that they weren't deserving of being educated. It would be a waste, right? They're never going to get a job. Why educate them? Why spend money educating children with disabilities? And then it's really only been in the last 30 years or so, 40 years, that we've started to undo that we've seen the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that we've seen a channel of challenges arise for parents, right? Due process complaints, inclusion, pushing into the classroom, children with disabilities not being educated in the basement with no one watching, right? We're better than that, right? Educating girls and women. It's also important to remember that early American education was not just exclusively of white people, but white men. Early 19th century girls and women who were fortunate enough to be able to access education, they were taught homemaking, right? Needlework, cooking, etiquette. It was believed that, again, why give women any other skills or tools? They don't need them. They're home. They need home skills. They don't need to be in school. They need to be home. And this is how we've formulated our society. And then I've covered this, but I want to spend a little bit more time on Indigenous learners. Some of you know where I'm going with this. Through mid-19th century, virtually all slave codes, we covered this, prohibited education of Black Americans. Prohibited meaning by law, right? We looked at some of those laws. And at the time, it was widely thought, again, educating those believed to be inferior is not just a waste of resources, but it's a threat. It could be a threat. And that's stemming back to some of those vestiges of slavery. If you're caught reading a book, you get your hands cut off, right? Because books are knowledge. Books are power. Knowledge is power, right? And so we'll get into that. That's a little bit why some of these things are happening now, right? Because it's recognized that the more you know, the more you grow, right? We know the poem. Lest we forget, American Indian boarding schools, Indian Civilization Acts, right? Kill the Indian, save the man. Schools expressly intended to implement cultural genocide through the removal and reprogramming of American Indian and Alaska Native children to accomplish the systematic destruction of those Native cultures and communities. This happened. I didn't learn this until college. I had no idea that we had separate schools for Native Americans and Alaska Native children, American Indian, whatever terms change. Yes, so we've ostracized so many people and groups and identities. And so I say this to highlight that we never started this work on an equal playing field. We were just never on one. The closer that we get to that, the farther out of reach it seems. That's why a lot of you are here. You recognize what's at stake. And for those of you that don't believe me or never heard of it, Indian training school, right? Cultural names changed, cultural dress prohibited, young people forced into shoes.
Although I will say,
source.
This is wild. Hi, Sage.
Can you hear us? Hello.
Oh,
Yes.
wow.
Hi.
And the audio out of that is really good, too.
My first time was
What's
out.
this?
So.
Is this in the
Okay, so we have this thing.
Oh, Christina. It's okay, Christina. I'm happy for people to chime in and to share.
Sorry about that. That was Christina. She's had to go do something and she didn't mute. I apologize that. Sorry.
No. So, right, and also just recognizing that some of you joined late. In the beginning, I said, there's a lot, right? You're gonna maybe feel some kind of way. And we're also not able to really cover everything. We're not able to unpack everything. It's gonna feel like, whoa, and you're like, what do we do? We'll get to that at the end. And I'm also going to move quicker with time. I really want to show the video. I kind of don't know if we have time. Let's go for it. I think we have 2 minutes.
To liberatory movements through the repression.
Okay.
Last summer, the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery catalyzed an unprecedented worldwide mobilization, activating tens of millions of Americans of all races to demand institutional accountability and reform. As these images spread across the world, the right scrambled for a way to snuff out this transformative energy. And they think they found it by orchestrating a repressive censorship campaign. In Arizona, Idaho, Texas, Georgia, we are seeing school boards attempting to rewrite curriculums, teachers getting fired for educating their students about racial disparities, and potentially an entire generation being fed lies about American history. Make no mistake, what we are seeing now is a calculated backlash to last year's summer of racial reckoning. The right is going to try to convince you that we need to ban critical race theory, intersectionality, structural racism, implicit bias, diversity training, and the 1619 Project. But understand that this organized, well-funded, and coordinated campaign isn't an honest debate about these ideas. Most couldn't even define what these ideas are. And that's the point. They want to scare and silence our society back to colorblind submission, where George Floyd and Black people's killability is just a natural, everyday feature of American life, unproblematic, unchangeable, and disconnected from the history of anti-Black racism. From the criminalization of abolitionist literature to the McCarthy-era witch hunts, we've seen the government respond to liberatory movements through the repression of anti-racist ideas time and time again. If you are concerned about these efforts to censor history, to muzzle anti-racist speech, to expand voter suppression, and to criminalize protest, we urge you to join us in standing up for racial justice. We need to fight back like our lives depend on it, because they do.
Hashtag Truth Be Told, African American Policy Foundation. I feel like that 2 minutes, I would have taken 10. Like I've taken an hour and 10 so far to say a lot of those things. And so we'll keep moving. But, right, like there's the progress and then there's the backlash. There's the progress, there's the regression. This is not new. And so where that situates us is we can respond a little bit better and stronger each time. And so, as I said, it seems like I'm jumping around. These were at the top are kind of squares walking through pieces, and I said I'd break them down a little bit further. So continuing to do that, we're back now. We've come from racial reckonings, and now here is backlash. So the critical race theory ban, right? Equity training ban. Racial sensitivity training outlaw. That was temporary to hold. So long ago, not that long, right? Racial sensitivity trainings were long conducted on college campuses and much of corporate America. Not really clear what's happening at a federal agency. Maybe they're doing really great work at a federal level. And Christopher Rufo, we just saw a tweet from him about when they hear something crazy and they think critical race theory, we've done our jobs, right? Trump should end all of these programs immediately. It's astonishing, he says, how critical race theory has pervaded every institution in the federal government. That's news. What I've discovered is that critical race theory has become, in essence, the default ideology of the federal bureaucracy and is now being weaponized against the American people. Huh? Really? I don't know that our federal government is leading critical race theory efforts on any front, but but that's just my take. And then we have our September 2020. What's today? That was yesterday. 2 years ago, in one day, executive order combating race and sex stereotypes. Almost sounds like that could be a good thing. But of course, this is the order from then number 45, President Trump, of this ban that then Joe Biden rolled back. Public discussions in the media rev up, right? This is what sparks. Stop teaching critical racist theory to our kids. Teach STEM and not CRT. Education, not indoctrination. Schools now taking hold, right? Rolling back the programming, rolling back books, restricting words, restricting curriculum, restricting teachers, permitting, not permitting parents to weigh in. Students don't have a voice. And so one example, these are the article on the left and the photo on the right are separate. Quote, there are people out there who don't understand what CRT is. And then so in their misunderstanding of it, they make a report, but it's not actually CRT. These are words from a principal or superintendent of a school district. I had 2 calls in the last week. They're having a Black History Month program and they consider Black history CRT. What the superintendent says is having Black history program is not critical race theory. The State Board of Education in August approved a resolution banning the teaching of divisive concepts, right? That's the other term we keep saying, in the wake of a national reckoning against critical race theory. The state was asked to investigate at least one other alleged violation of the new policy after a parent complained about a Huntsville teacher diversity training. This is where we're at. This is what's happening. 2021 caption of the photo, a mass rally was organized outside New Hampshire governor's office in order to prevent a divisive concepts ban going into law. New Hampshire's ban divisive concepts faced numerous lawsuits, rallies, and pushback. These fights are ongoing. The Attorney General office would like the court to dismiss all the lawsuits, right? The Freedom from Discrimination in the Workplaces of Education law, which regulates discussion of discrimination in the classroom, dismiss it, right? Because there's no problem with doing that. The unions, however, are pushing back. In New Hampshire, they're saying the law puts a chill, keep hearing that word, on what teachers can discuss. Really, in this case, because no state officials can explain what the law is doing or what it is banning. Therefore, the law has created an environment where teachers are afraid to teach certain topics, particularly students being taught about race, about gender, about sexual orientation, about their identities. Diversity, equity, and inclusion administrators are under attack. Children are suffering from censorship, and students, particularly from historically marginalized backgrounds, are especially robbed of the right to see themselves and their lived experiences reflected in their education, end quote. And I'll share that article as well. And meanwhile, the spotlight is shifting a little bit, right? There's a moving target here. And as I mentioned, the third wave of these anti-LGBTQ policies surfacing now at a state level, and I would say again, right? So during 2022 legislative session, dozens of states are considering, they're doing it right now, LGBTQ legislation. Some of those bills will advance comprehensive non-discrimination laws. Some states are stepping up, right, to say maybe over there, but not here. And others will definitely attempt to continue to single out and target LGBTQ people for unfair and unequal treatment. Freedom for All Americans, which is where this image is from, is tracking each piece of all legislation related to LGBTQ discrimination. This is from a school policy bill to medical care bills to sports bans, state legislatures, school board policies, everything in between. It's a fully comprehensive tracker specific to LGBTQ policies, right? Because there are other trackers. This is, again, freedomforallamericans.org, and we'll share. If anyone's looking, it's their legislative tracker. And in true Ashli fashion, we have more videos. And so again, it's I could pull an example probably from all 50 states and we'd be here all day, but I pulled one of each topic, all from different states, and decided to cover it this way. And I think a lot of this is, we know this, right? We've seen this. We want to know how to respond.
Controversy tonight over a new policy on how gender identity is addressed in Utah schools.
Yeah, educators, education leaders, and parents met to tackle that topic today. Morgan Wolf joins us live. And Morgan, there was even a protest led by LGBTQ supporters.
Yes, and that happened this morning. Now, this policy isn't set in stone. It's still being debated, but what it is talking about is the pronouns for students and if teachers have the right to use them. And so this is a policy draft that has been drawn up by the Utah Board of Education. And this is stemming really from a lot of bullying that transgender students and non-binary students have seen in Utah classrooms, from what I've been told. So the proposed changes was discussed at a meeting today where the legality around it was actually questioned. The Family Education Rights Privacy Act says that teachers with a legitimate educational need should have access to a student's records, but this draft policy says that school personnel shouldn't disclose any info to reveal a student's gender. Some parents say that this is infringement on their rights. Other parents of LGBTQIA students say that it will help children feel safe.
It's a matter of life and death for trans students. There's a lot of studies that indicate that when chosen names and pronouns are used, suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts, and self-harm decrease.
During that meeting this morning, board members took public comment where some parents expressed opposition to the policy off screen.
I would hate to see anything of a problem come against the Utah School Board or against our teachers for promoting something that had ultimate damage to children in the long run and could concern the children's future health if they choose to realize that this isn't the path that they wanted to take.
That's the reason I'm here, is because these children, they need to stay. According to SHARP survey data from 2019, transgender and non-binary students are at an increased risk of discrimination, bullying, depression, and suicidal thoughts. The board is taking this information into heavy consideration with this policy moving forward. Also,
Controversy tonight over a new policy on how gender identity is addressed.
I was like, is it going to keep playing? And
Controversy tonight over a new policy on how gender identity is addressed.
Okay, hit pause again. Hempfield School District, some of us know, became one of the first in the state to adopt a policy on requiring transgender athletes to participate in teams based on their biological sex rather than their gender identity. This happened very recently this year. And we're also seeing
Utah schools.
Yeah,
education and culture wars have a new target: pride flags in the classroom. With students back in school, classroom displays of LGBTQ pride symbols are sparking debate in districts across the country. NBC News Out reporter Matt Levitas joins me now. Matt, an Oregon school board last week banned educators from displaying pride flags. One school board member saying, "We don't pay our teachers to push their political views on our students. That's not their place." How else are schools targeting LGBTQ plus symbols in class?
Right. So just as you mentioned in the case in Newberg, Oregon, school officials there have banned pride flags from being displayed in classrooms and in school hallways. And we're seeing this happening all throughout the country in states like Missouri and in Utah. In one case in particular, in Irving, Texas, school officials there have ordered the removal of rainbow stickers and other stickers that have supportive words like ally from classroom doors.
So the big question is how is this affecting the students? You caught up with a 16-year-old at a high school in Irving. What did he tell you?
Right. So I spoke with a student, and his name is Victor Frausto. He identifies as gay, and he leads his school's Gay Straight Alliance Club. So he told me that the message from these stickers being removed at his high school was that he does not belong, he should not be there, he does not fit in. And he also added that because the directive came from the school itself, he worries that this is now going to invite further bullying and harassment against him and other LGBTQ students.
I was like pausing so there isn't any video unmuting happening. And what I was trying to say, Miami-Dade School Board voted to disallow two sex ed textbooks that discussed abortion and contraception. And this is interesting, particularly because prior, like last week, meaning not now, but last week in this example was a 5-4 vote. The board opted not to adopt the textbooks, even though the school board staff and an independent hearing officer recommended the books. The school board itself had initially also approved the books months prior, and the July decision left 0 books left for the curriculum, which is required by state law to have books for your class. Those against the book said they objected to content. Some said it wasn't age appropriate. One board member who voted to approve the book said they actually had hundreds of emails from concerned parents asking the board to reconsider and approve the books. And I am happy to report that a week later, they did reverse that vote, and they did allow curriculum and textbooks to be present in classrooms. And I just want to add that I picked these particular examples because Pennsylvania is currently dealing with all of these issues in different districts, and I want to keep us moving. I'm gonna highlight this slide. Overall, a very recent survey, literally 2 days ago, from global research firm Ipsos, found strong majority believe that book banning, racial LGBTQ censorship are the doings of politicians and that they're not in the best interest of children. Americans feel, almost majority, almost three-fourths, feel that politicians are using children in school as political pawns. And about 70% of Americans and parents feel that the laws are being driven by politicians to advance their careers. They're not actually being driven by parent concerns, which I shared were things like safety, bullying, children being prepared for success. Other parents mentioned things such as gun violence. Other parents, overwhelming percent, 93%, want elected leaders to focus on, 1, making sure students are safe, and 2, ensuring schools have adequate funding. And so overall, parents and Americans believe lessons about racism help prepare children for a better future. So we're not going to cover pledge right now, but I will say that there is a group that might get this. I also want to pause for our facilitators to see if breakout rooms make sense. I know we have a class, and maybe that's its own breakout room. And so what we want to do is put our knowledge into practice, right? So everyone will get a breakout room and a resource if you'd like, or you can change your chat name, but your name, your pronouns, what brings you here. We covered that. If you didn't check in the chat, you can still do so in your breakout room or in the chat now. And so I will share links. I guess how many people are here? How many rooms would make sense?
Like 4 rooms with 5 person per room. What do you think?
That's what I was just thinking. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm doing that right now, so everyone will get knocked in.
And so yeah, so I'll put them in the chat. You spend a few times just taking over the resource, looking over, flipping through it, scanning. Obviously, some are long and some are short. And then as a group, there will be the questions. So we can put the questions in the chat, but just so everyone knows, it's really kind of just basic, right? What is this resource and who put it out? How would you use it? Do you find it helpful? Is there something that you can point out that you've learned? And are there groups that you think you might want to share the resource with? So I'm going to stop sharing screen.
Can you put that in the chat, those questions too, and I'll put it in each room? Okay, so I'm going to open up the rooms. And we'll do some talking. And how long are we supposed to be there? I was opening rooms.
Yeah, let's do between 10 and 15 minutes.
Great.
People have time to do a dive. Yep. Yes. Okay. People are rejoining from our breakout rooms. We're also winding down time-wise. I think all the breakout rooms are closed. Yes. Okay. No one is still in a separate cyberspace. So I popped around to the groups. Don't have a ton of time left. I do want to walk through the affirmative rights. I purposely did not spend too much time on that because some of it is situational and a lot of it, all of it will be shared out in the slides. And so I want to make sure that I read them and you hear them, but then it'll take time to well, what law is this and how does it apply? And does it apply to me in this scenario? Is kind of a different process. So that will be shared as a resource. And then is there a group that would like to share? Does anyone unpack any of the resources? We had one from ADL, we had HRC and PEA, sorry, so many acronyms. And I did repaste those all in the chat, but a couple people hadn't joined yet. So I'll pause. If there's a group that would like to share, you can respond to the questions of where the resource came from, how would you use it, who do you think you could share it with, and something that you learned from it.
Hello, hi. Yes, we were just discussing the school board resource that you posted.
Yes, MPEA, grassroots board.
Who wants to say what we discussed?
I want to know if you ever work in a mirror.
Can she hear you?
What was that?
That was Miss Hilda. She's one of our community mentors, and she's over here. But she wants to know: did you ever work with EMIR? EMIR. Every murder is real.
No.
No. Okay.
We had an Ashley.
And she
had
had
the law center.
Yes. Michelle's going to record.
Uh-oh.
Wait,
No, we're back.
I think so.
All right. Here's Michelle. She's going to tell you. Oh, yeah. Oh. Here's Michelle, one of our teacher candidates.
Hello. So my classmates and I discussed that we would use our resources by using our voices and voting, and definitely educating others on why we feel this is important, because it is important.
And the school board member. That you're voting for the school board.
Oh, and not we're voting for the school board. Sorry, I didn't put that in there. And by spreading awareness, because our best tool is our voice. And most people just look at the surface of things and don't want to educate themselves. So it's first step we can take is by educating other people.
Definitely. And I was that's
like a true teacher.
Yeah, I was one of the resources, they're all really different. And so that one focuses on school boards. It even has a section on, could I run for school board? What does that even mean? What does that look like? What would that be like? And I think there's definitely districts, some with, vacancies, some with really contentious elections, and others where voter turnout is so low. You might have a school board election and then 3% of the voting base turns out. And so it's a position of power that people often overlook. And it's at the point where we are thinking about, well, now we have this extremist board member, or we have this person or this policy, and then it's well, it's too late at that point. The point is before the election, right? The point of influence is at the voting or even selecting the candidate. So yes. And I was I just shared, I missed one, and so I reshared that. Okay. If others would like to chime in, please use the chat. We're gonna go ahead and pick back up and just our final remaining minutes. So what I want to do is I'd like to read these. I think I can read them fast enough. I may not be able to. There's so many rights that you have, and the citations and such will be shared in the resources on the resource slide. But there is a right to be free from discrimination, particularly based on gender or sexual orientation. That is illegal. Racial discrimination in schools violates Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. It also violates Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There is a right to express your gender identity. You have a right to privacy. Schools are not allowed to out you. That is a violation of the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, also known as FERPA. There is a right to form a gay-straight alliance or a Black student union whenever there are also other non-academic clubs at a school. So sometimes schools don't have any non-academic clubs, and then you can't form one that is non-academic, but if there are, then sure. You have a right to participate in sports programs consistent with your gender identity, and to deny students this right is discrimination on the basis of sex and gender identity. We know in Pennsylvania that those policies have passed or are being considered. And so at the point in which a student is discriminated against, there will be legal action to step in because the law is pretty clear on that front. School districts cannot discriminate against transgender and non-binary students by requiring to use a bathroom or locker room that does not match their gender identity. There's legal support for that, moral support for that. It's a safety concern in many instances. More rights. Purposefully and persistently misgendering a student can be considered harassment or discrimination. And that does include misusing their preferred name or preferred pronouns. Harassment, actually, I won't read the definition of harassment, but it's there. Schools have an obligation, usually once they're put on notice, to report bullying and harassment, and there's a further legal duty to investigate and keep children safe. EOC has a guide that I'll share about requesting bullying investigations, putting it in writing, saying it at the meeting and asking for something to be done is a great start. A lot of times does not trigger a formal investigation where a report is issued as to what the school found about the bullying. It usually doesn't. That's a step that doesn't happen unless someone demands it. Pennsylvania law also requires public schools to adopt policy or amend existing policies related to bullying. They need to incorporate it into the school's code of conduct. The policy must set forth disciplinary consequences for bullying and provide for prevention, intervention, and education. The policy must also identify an appropriate school staff. Who's receiving these complaints? And the school has to review the policy at least every 3 years. And a few more rights. Students maintain their First Amendment rights in school, but they can be limited. Off-school speech sometimes can be restricted. Again, Pennsylvania purporting itself into national media. We have what is called, right, the cheerleading Snapchat case, right, that went to the Supreme Court last year and decided in the student's favor, where a student made an angry Snapchat post because they did not make the cheerleading squad. And they said F the school, and they sought to, discipline the student, suspend the student, charge the student, do all these things based under the guise of protecting the school. And the Supreme Court said, you're going way too far. This conduct was off school. It didn't impact school until you made it a school issue. And now you can't blame the student for that. That's Pennsylvania. Once again, students have a right to meet and protest. Students have a right to publish and distribute written speech. Students have a right to learn in an environment free from racist hate, including slurs or hate symbols. And school officials have a legal duty to prevent and stop that type of toxic school environment. There's always hope, right? There's always something more we can do. I wanted to read an excerpt. I have 2 minutes. I also said I'd leave time for questions, so that wasn't really fair. And so I'll give the option. I'll pause briefly. I'll see if there's questions. You can also put them in the chat and I can start to read the excerpt. Other than that, we have our thank you slide and my contact information for those that need it. ELC is in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. We are statewide. It is a nonprofit organization. Our legal services, our legal advice, our help, our analysis are free. And so I don't see questions. I do want to read positive story. I think I've shared a lot of negativity today. And so we'll just go back briefly and end us on a high note. Okay, so this is you could say opinion piece or editorial from The Guardian, written by well, a couple people wrote it. The pieces that I'm going to read are from the librarian. So censorship of books has reached crisis level, as we know, and we center in on Martha Hickson, who says, "Let readers be leaders." Martha Hickson, a librarian at North Hunterdon School in Annandale, New Jersey, was watching her school district school board meeting from home in September 2021 when she found herself dragged into the center of a battle over book banning. A small but vocal group of parents had attended the meeting to demand the board remove several books that addressed LGBTQ experiences. This included Gender Queer by Maya Kabab and Lawn Boy by Jonathan Evison from school libraries. And one particularly emotional speaker called out Hickson by name. She described her as a pedophile, a pornographer, a groomer of children. "Martha, I was absolutely stunned. My heart was beating out of my chest. I was queasy. I didn't know what to do. I was beside myself." But once Hickson regained her composure, she realized she did know what to do. In 2019, she was a part of an effort to restore the book Fun Home, a memoir by Alison Betchel that addresses, among other things, sexual orientation to schools in the district. She said, "I've been laying low since then because things were fine, but I still had that contact information, and I reactivated that network." While the board meeting was still taking place, Hickson got out her phone and got to work. She contacted people who had taken on the Fun Home ban, as well as organizations including the American Library Association, the National Coalition Against Censorship, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. She reached out to Genders and Sexualities Alliances at both high schools in the district. These student-led groups provide safe space for students to build community and speak out against injustice. At the next school board meeting, 400 people, all opposed to the bans, turned up. The most compelling speakers were the kids, Hickson said. "My motto right now is to let readers be the leaders," because it was the kids that did an amazing job of standing there, withstanding the taunts and jeers of people on the other side. They were models for public discourse. They were just excellent. As the fight dragged on, Hickson faced a torrent of hate mail, precipitating what she described as a breakdown. Opponents of the book bans came out in force at the November school board meeting, and by the new year, a school board advisory committee announced the decision. 4 of the targeted books would be allowed to remain in libraries, all but one. This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson was to be removed. A nonfiction book tackling issues of sexuality and gender for young adult audience, This Book is Gay is one of the 10 most frequently challenged book titles, according to studies in 2021. I just have so much admiration for the kids who picked that book off the shelf, walk through a library full of other teenagers, come up to the circulation decks to me, the 62-year-old woman who they probably don't know very well. Some don't know me at all, Hickson said, and noting that the book's cover illustration is a pride flag. Every time a kid hands you a book that they've chosen to read, they're handing you a little insight to themselves. I admire the backbone that it takes for a 14, 15, 16-year-old to hand you This Book is Gay. Hickson and the anti-censorship groups weren't about to settle, and they demanded that that book be reinstated. At the January school board meeting, opponents of the book ban again flocked in. One student read out a letter from David Levithan, a New Jersey-born author whose young adult novels include Two Boys Kissing and Boy Meets Boy. Levithan argued that This Book is Gay should be reinstated, and 55 others put in requests to speak. The board listened, and the book was retained. I fell apart crying, Hickson said. I was so relieved and so happy and so grateful for all the support from the community. I'm so, so proud of my students, both current and past. It reinforced Hickson's belief of the importance of books in helping children understand themselves and their place in the world. For somebody to come and try to snag "This book is gay" or any of the other books on LGBTQ topics, I think it is a tremendous insult to these kids, to their relationship with the library, and to their relationship with the community. All of our kids deserve to see themselves represented in the library books. So thanks, everyone. There's more to that article. I did share that, and I hope you will continue to read and fight. I will definitely be sharing out these slides, resources and links and tools and toolkits. And so I thank you for spending, 2 hours on a Friday morning with me.
Thank you, Ashli, for your time, for your knowledge, your expertise. And where are you off to? Where's your next step if your fellowship's ending?
Yes, so actually maybe a week from now. How many days are in September? Seven more days left of September, 7 more days left of my fellowship. And as of October 1st, I will actually transition to staff attorney role at Education Law Center. So I'll be staying on to lead this new work for ELC, and still focusing on juvenile justice issues, and also probably a lawsuit or two. So.
Excellent. Well, we will definitely be in touch. We are so grateful for you and all you do and all you will continue to do. And thank you. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you so much.